Having established his eye-protein style while crafting love letters to giant monsters and things which go bump in the night, with Crimson Peak, Del Toro turned his interest to classic Hammer horror films while drawing further inspiration from the likes of House on Haunted Hill and The Shining to craft a gothic love story hidden under the guise of a ghost story. Released to middling fanfare, the film remains, much like his early films like Kronos, something of an undiscussed entry in his filmography. Until now. I'm Owen.
I'm Kim.
And you're listening to Movies and Tea. Let's take it to the booth. Welcome everyone to Movies and Tea, and we are almost at the end now of our re-evaluation of the Del Toro filmography, and while it's certainly been a fun ride, we've hit a lot of our own personal highlights of the series. Now, for myself at least, is getting into some of the more uncharted waters of the filmography. Starting off, of course, with Crimson Peak, the 2005 Gothic romance film. This is a film which it's still in that same sort of turbulent sort of period of production sort of hell that Del Toro was in when he was making Crimson Peak. He was sort of going back and forth with like whether he was going to direct The Hobbit. He was still trying to get in the Mountains of Madness sort of greenlit, and just nothing was really going through. And in the end, Crimson Peak is sort of what came out, this sort of maelstrom of production frustration, really. The film itself, it was something of a box office disappointment, only grossing 74 million worldwide against a budget of 55 million. And it sort of in many ways marked a real change in pace for Del Toro's here. It was a film which sort of, he seemed to be trying to do something new. I mean, this is certainly his first period piece. As the film itself is set in 1887, starting in Buffalo, New York, and then moving across to these rain-soaked shores of England. But I mean, Kim, how do you sort of find Crimson Peak? I mean, this is obviously a costume drama. It's a gothic romance. It's, as I say, it's something completely different from Del Toro compared to what we've obviously seen in his previous films.
For this one, I think the tables are turning now in our filmography of Del Toro, mostly because at this point we're heading into films where we're already in the films where I've seen at least once these films.
Yeah.
And Crimson Peak, I remember a lot because I saw it at the theater, and it wasn't such a great theater experience, just the quality of it, I mean. But the movie itself was one that I remembered. I appreciated it a lot more than the doofus on top that was making fun and making all kinds of weird noise. So it was like, I think that the deal is that watching it a second time was where I started having some issues with it. Because a lot of things that I appreciated the first time, I felt like when I go a little deeper, it didn't have that depth that the previous films had. And it's sad because this is really up my alley, and it's a gothic romance, which I love. I'm gonna talk about, further viewing later, because there's another one that I really do like. Period piece. And then I think one of the biggest challenge for this film when it came out and why it grows so low was that everybody's expectations was that it was primarily a horror film and secondly a gothic romance. But it turns out that Del Toro, when people were saying that, I remembered reading something that he clarified that this was supposed to be a gothic romance and not a horror film. So I think that's where most of the issues really came for Crimson Peak. Like, I still think there's a lot of qualities of this that I do like in the moments of horror and just the ghost element of it, it's still really good. The slow parts that feel very redundant and very when we're not being psychological or whatnot is really just the story of these two people, Edith, played by Mia Wasikowska, and Thomas Sharp, played by Tom Hiddleston. I think that it wasn't their issue as in they didn't do a good job playing the characters. It was just the characters themselves were the story and the romance was kind of when I watched it the second time, I didn't really like it as much.
Okay. I'm glad that you were able to pronounce a surname, because I'm looking at it thinking, how the hell am I supposed to pronounce that? There's a million syllables in there. But certainly Mia as Edith Cushing, she's something of a waif, shall we say? She's this From the start, I mean, it's introduced to the fact that she lost her mother, and around the same time, she started seeing visions of ghosts, which warn her there to be aware of Crimson Peak. Now, years later, she's all grown up, and her father's approached, along with several other investors in Boston, by this English baronet here, played by Tom Hiddleston, who's trying to raise capital for his clay mining device, and at the same time, they want nothing to do with him. They just reject his proposals outright, and you think he's already sort of like go back to England, but he's at the same time he's sort of sparked this sort of early sort of stages of a romance with Mia's character. Right from the start, there's this little bit of intrigue as to what's going on there, because he's kind of a mysterious character, and I mean he's accompanied by his psychotic sister, here played by Jessica Chastain. She plays Lucille, and you know there's something up with this pair, but you're not sure exactly what their intentions are. So when Edith's father is sort of brutally murdered, it sort of sets in motion this whole plot as she suddenly finds herself drawn into the mystery of Crimson Peak and what the true intentions of these siblings are. And I think it's here where the problems sort of lie. First of all, I was really enjoying it once when we're shown Boston, because I think 18th century Boston is something I haven't seen before, and I was really into the whole setup. I thought that was really great. However, when we get over to England, it's just traditional sort of costume drama fare, and I mean, I'm being a Brit, I mean, this is all we seem to churn out is just these costume dramas, and we churn out these adaptations, Bronte and Austen, and this seems to be the only thing we seem to be capable of doing these days in the British film industry. So from that perspective, it just holds no interest in myself, and it's kind of the reason I couldn't get into Penny Dreadful. Just this whole sort of costume drama set, it does absolutely nothing for me. And while our friends over in the States, and I don't know, perhaps it's the same for you guys over in Canada, where you get all excited about Downton Abbey. And I mean, Downton Abbey over here is a program for the older generation. It's not this hip young broadcasting show over here. We no sort of young people sort of watch it like it's like they would with like Game of Thrones or anything. So okay. The whole sort of setup, I mean, as I said, just great, another England set costume drama. It does nothing for me. But the main sort of issue I have here is the fact that the film can never seem to figure out what it wants to be. Yeah. It's sort of like, we're introduced with ghosts, it's like, oh, we're having a ghost story, and then we have this whole love story, and it's like, okay, we're having a love story, and being a Del Toro movie, and the imagery he's choosing to throw here, it's a Gothic love story. I mean, that's something interesting. And then we have all these other elements being thrown in. It's like, just pick a side of the road you want to be on here. It was just frustrating constantly that I would get into one sort of genre, and then Del Toro was like, no, I want to try something else, and it was sort of like this constant switching of styles. It just had no sort of flair, no sort of sense to it, and it just became this like overly frustrating affair.
I get where you're coming from, but I think that if it's anything we've learned from this whole Del Toro filmography, and with like only one more film left, and obviously that's going to be his Oscar-winning film. So we're looking at all these films right now, and there's something very unique about Del Toro. Not only is how he films it, and how beautiful and visually stunning, and is also the fact that he likes to tell stories with a lot of tangents and a lot of different, and he always mixes genres together and stuff like that. And I'm okay with that. And I think that the story is okay in that sense that it really doesn't... You're right. I see where you're coming from, where, like, that can't really decide what it wants to be, and it never stays in that one phase for long enough for you to kind of, like, connect with.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the main problems, is that it's kind of really, really, like, just jumping around. And it's really... I think that the most outstanding part of this film is how things are done. And if you can be okay with, I don't know, the sum of the good things being better than, making it the whole thing being good, I guess. Because there's a lot of, there are a lot of layers here. as we're talking about this, I'm kind of like noticing a bit more where, you know, they start off a little bit in that mystery thing, and then we have like another, like, it's like a lot of questions where, you know, in New York, in Boston, it was like, how did the father die? You know, who murdered him? We never really know that until really later on. And then, you know, we go on and then we're like, okay, well, there's this love story. Does he really love her? And then there's like that whole sibling thing. Well, the brother and sister, who are they, you know? And why do they live in a house which has a broken roof and leaves falling through it? You know, like, what is the mystery of this this mansion, you know? Why are, you know, and then there's all this like very, very deep imagery and these different genres that come together, and it's just, you know, questions after questions of things that are built up. And I can appreciate what he's trying to do here, but I think that the main issue is really that no part gets taken care of long enough, you know? Like, I'm gonna take, like, say, Devil's Backbone, because that's the most comparable at this point, is that it's also it's also a ghost story mixed with kind of something else. Yeah. And in that one, we only have, you know, two, you know, sort of genres of story. Like, there are a few tangents, you know, there's a bit of love, and there's a bit of, like, revenge, and there's a bit of, like, greed, and all that sort of stuff mixed into it. But we actually get to, you know, understand these characters a little bit more. And we actually get to really see how these relationships are, and, you know, there's, like, kind of this depth to just, you know, oh, well, what is going on here and what is going on there. But I think that Devil's Backbone really works because it's still really focused on, you know, two stories. And here it's like kind of like the thriller that I hate is those thrillers which is like, oh, I'm gonna do all these, like, you know, smokes and screens, is that what you call it? And then suddenly, all of a sudden, by the end, it's like, oh, the twist unravels itself, and there's all these twisted things that happen, and, you know, disturbing resolutions, and you're just like, you know, I hate the fact that some movies are like that, where it's like suddenly the part where you finally get the twist is the part that is meant for you to be really excited, but the whole movie before that didn't really make you excited.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and it's a shame really, because obviously when we look at Mia's performance here, and certainly Tom Hiddleston's performance as well, they have very good on-screen chemistry, which I think certainly helps it. But at the same time, she really oversells the sickness that is sort of overcoming her when she goes to Crimson Peak. And I love the setup for Crimson Peak. I think it's an absolutely stunning set. It's perhaps cheapened slightly by the CGI, which turns the snow red because of the clay underneath. Which was a real shame, really, because it was sort of like you're painting this beautiful picture and then you're kind of like throwing this sort of slapdash finish on it with your snow effects, and it's sort of like the snow itself is like one of the key visual elements to it. I mean, there's nothing more effective than blood on snow, and certainly if you've got red clay underneath that's coming up and causing the snow to turn red and give it this sort of like give the location its name, this turning the peak crimson. It's like, why did you cheap out the CGI? It's sort of like, was there no way that you could do this to make it seem a little better? Because it just really frustrated me, and especially when there's such time and care put into the interior of the mansion. And as you said, there's a bloody great big hole in the roof which creates this spotlight effect in the center, which you've got snow like gently falling down, and it just looks absolutely stunning. Yeah. And as we go through it and we discover all these like hidden rooms within its walls, it sort of really adds to these characters of Lucille and Thomas.
I think just to cut you off, it's like not only are the two of them such, you know, mysterious characters, I think what really brings it to life is that I think that what Boston didn't have in that setting was the fact that Crimson Peak and, you know, that whole mansion and that beautiful, like visually it's so nice, but at the same time it has so much character also. Like there's so much to discover inside the house, and as we go further in the story, I don't know if this is considered a spoiler or not, but we realize that there's something that connects these two to the house. There's something about, you know, this mansion that they're living in that they're trying to do, and, you know, that's kind of like their ulterior motive that I don't think we actually got like a really clear image as to why they're doing these things.
I think if it is sort of in the big reveal at the end, it sort of clarifies what their intentions are. I think I'm just going to warn that, you know, there are going to be spoilers on this point, because I think it's going to be a little difficult to sort of dive in further without revealing too much, but we'll try and cut the spoilers to a minimum. Certainly when it comes to this plot that Lucille and Thomas have been running, because we find from as the mystery sort of unravels here is the fact that this isn't that Edith isn't the first sort of victim of their plot. The fact that they've got this scheme where Thomas basically marries wealthy women, and they slowly poison them so that they can steal their money. And I think this is the main one of the big issues I have, is the fact that when we look at Wasikowski's performance here, and that when she's supposed to be getting weaker by when she's at Crimson Peak, she just sort of like really goes full force for it, and you just feel that she's going to keel over at any moment. And it's very distracting to watch someone being all pale and sickly for a good hour of the film's runtime, and it's sort of like, oh, just have a sandwich or something. Just stop drinking tea. Clearly you were fine until you started drinking tea. Tea is not something that is clearly agreeing with yourself. So that was a little distracting, and just the relationship between her character and Thomas, the fact that he's like actively pursues her, and then as soon as they get married at Goes Crimson Peak, he becomes very disinterested and very sort of cold to her.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like you feel that he's holding back Hiddleston's performance. You want him to almost become something of a brute to really sort of sell this character, but instead he just like, I don't know, it's like he's covering for something else. That, oh well, maybe he's like a closet homosexual or something, and that's the reason for this lack of interest. So you draw all these other comparisons of like why he's not interested in this clearly very attractive girl who is interested in him, despite the fact that he's continuously so cold to her. She sort of really sort of clings to this idea of what they had before.
And you know, the thing is, you know, the turning point is that, you know, we have all these things, and then suddenly we have, you know, that moment when they leave and they can't come back to Crimson Peak. And then at that moment we really see that, you know, there is something between them, and he does want to be more intimate with her. And then it brings on that whole question of, you know, giving the like, why is he so distant at home but not so much when he's away? And obviously, I think is something that I don't think at this point we've actually had any like active sexual scenes in any Del Toro films. We've seen like, you know, the beginning and ending of things, right? But never like a full on scene. And here we really get that scene that we get. And I think that it's kind of sad that right now, I think like when I watch that scene, I think it's done really well. But at the same time, like, I don't think that Mia Wasikowska, like, I don't think she ever will be able to be as amazing and as, like, such a powerful scene as, like, when she did that whole, like, she had the, I don't want to say it. It's like a scene in Stoker that I watched. And that was a scene that, like, changed me. Like, I thought it was so amazing. I don't know. Have you seen Stoker?
I've seen Stoker. I'm just trying to recall the scene that you're talking on about. I mean,
there were, I think, two very powerful scenes. I can't remember if the second one was just like, I don't know if that one was, I don't know right now. But there's one that was like, you know, I think it was by the piano. And she has this like, it's like this orgasmic scene that she has. And I just think it's like, it was so powerful that now I feel like there's nothing that can really compare to that sort of passion she has. And I think that, you know, the deal with it is that Edith and Thomas while their relationship was kind of like, a big developing point in the story,
Yeah.
there always seems to be something missing. Like that spark that really makes them someone, like a couple that you're really like, fighting for, either one or the other. And I think through the whole thing, the only one you really, really kind of bond with is Edith's character, because like the Edith character, because she is this person where gets sucked into the situation and you realize there's so much going on, she starts seeing these spirits again, and I think those are fantastically done as well, those the scenes with like the spirits and ghosts and stuff. And then like it's just like it's like so innocent, right? She gets thrown into these things, and then it's like, what is the resolution behind all this? Like, why is she chosen to be there? And obviously, we get the answer at the end, that this is a scheme. But it's just crazy how she fell down like the top floor of the building and she didn't die.
Yeah,
I can guarantee you, if you fall into a pile of leaves from that height, you would still get hurt.
There's a number of certainly a number of issues throughout. I mean, the intimacy scene, obviously, between Edith and Thomas. I mean, whenever you have sex scenes in costume dramas, it's always very awkward, and these bodice ripping sort of sequences, nobody ever seems to be having any fun. So it's very hard whenever you have a sex scene turn up in a costume drama, and here it's very much the same. It was intended to be hotter than it was, but I think it kind of made me glad that Del Toro went with the casting he went with, because I mean, originally his casting choices for this was Emma Watson and Benedict Cumberbatch, whose name is impossible to say without putting some gravitas behind it. And I think if I had to watch Emma Watson do that scene, I would have gone and burn my eyes out, because she's grating at the best of times. So to see her, much like Keira Knightley, try and do anything vaguely erotic, I can't think of anything bloody worse. So, but yeah, I mean, it's, as you said before, I mean, this is Del Toro's first attempt at doing a scene of intimacy. We normally see the post sort of sequence, or the sort of build up, but we never see him ever sort of like attempt to shoot these sort of sequence scenes. So it's definitely trying to branch out. I mean, certainly even with in terms of the theme, he's definitely trying new things here with this film. Whether they're successful or not, I think he's sort of very much in the taste of the viewer. But yeah, I think towards that sort of final reel, everything sort of gets a bit stupid. Not only have you got her falling off the balcony and surviving, you've got the whole White Knight sort of angle with Tom Hiddleston's character. The whole
Charlie Hunnam.
Yeah, with Charlie Hunnam, who plays the doctor, who's sort of like investigating the brother and sister, because it's sort of hinted on early on that with Edith's father, he gets sort of like a background check done on Thomas, and he clearly discovers something, because he pays off Thomas so he has nothing to do with his daughter. And so when it comes to Charlie Hunnam's character, he sort of picks up that thread and carries out his own investigation. It's sort of like, he felt very unnecessary. It's all like, why do we need this White Knight character to save Edith? Can't she save herself? And for all the use that he basically is when he does drag himself over to Crimson Peak, it's sort of like, it seems like even more of a sort of waste of time, his inclusion in the film, only to sort of like really sort of set in motion the air of mystery behind like Thomas and Lucille. But again, Edith finds all this out for herself for her own detection work. He sort of really plays no sort of like major point in like any part of the mystery, and just made him feel like sort of generally very unneeded.
Like that's the thing, is Charlie Hunnam's character was so underused. I think that's the proper way to use it. Is that like he wasn't written in well enough. Maybe it was like a post-editing decision that maybe like certain scenes were taken out or something. I feel like maybe that's what happened. And then now it turns out like he didn't have as much as weight as he was supposed to have. Because in the beginning, there was like this sort of hint of, like there's, he gets a little bit more weight, and you kind of see where he's coming from, and you get to see like why he's so involved and all this.
Yeah.
And then, it didn't make sense that, after she left, he'd be all like, oh, now I have to hunt all this down and figure out what happened. And then, like, oh, chase after this married woman. I don't know. And then he arrives, and then, the scene where he, like, bursts in is kind of like 3 seconds, and then he kind of, like, gets hurt, gets attacked, because he's real dumb also. So
he's essentially what Scatman Crothers is in The Shining. He looks like he's going to have some significance to the plot, but as soon as he attempts to perform some form of rescue here, he's just wiped out straight away. So
yeah, so like, I think that, like, well, as we're talking about this, I just find it really crazy is that the film really, the ending, the last third of the film is when we really get to see Jessica Chastain's character really come out, and she does a brilliant performance. Like, she does a fantastic performance here. It's just that she never also has that weight. We see all these little scenes of her here and there. She kind of, like, wanders through a scene in the background sometimes, and mysteriously you'll see her go through another scene and go through another room and do this and that. But she's never there for a really long time, and I guess that's to keep her mystery. But then, at the end, she just, like, spoiler alert, she goes, like, batshit crazy.
Yeah.
So that was kind of intense. I think that was the most, the second time watching it, that was definitely one of the biggest hooks, because obviously the other parts I still remembered a lot of, and it wasn't, I didn't feel things lived up as much as just watching Jessica Chastain's character in the last, in the last act really, like, go out of control.
Yeah. I mean, do you feel that Thomas gets off too easy as a result of Lucille basically being batshit crazy at the end of this film? I felt that Thomas was let off way too easy.
I think that, he's kind of like, it's not that he's let off easy. It's just the fact that it's kind of like it was expected to happen that she was going, that, like, it's always like that. Someone with, like, extreme evil, which is kind of like Jessica Chastain's character.
Yeah.
She gets into this, she goes crazy and she does something she regrets because she loses herself a little. She loses her mind a little. And does he get off easy? Well, is he really an evil character? I just feel like he's a really manipulated character. Like, he's been manipulated by his sister the whole time. But he's really evil.
I would say so. I mean, this isn't the first time that they pulled this scheme. He's been a willing accomplice. We find out through the sort of detective legwork here. Yeah. We find out he's been a willing accomplice in this scheme multiple times before. He's involved in an incestuous relationship with his sister, and it's only because of this this period, this costume drama version of a manic pixie dream girl in Mia Wachowski turns up, that, oh, wait a minute, I've decided that, I am capable of sleeping with other women than my sister, and I'm kind of down with this, and it's really only serves to make Lucille look crazy, because they basically shift everything onto her character.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's sort of like, oh, we can have her go completely nuts, and then we're just like have all it being her fault, and then we can redeem Thomas and white ghost him, and it's sort of like, just no. There was just no redemption to this character. It's sort of like he's got these evil connotations to his character, and it's like, we'll let him off.
Yeah, because he didn't, like, it's not like he chose to stop any of these things, right? Like, any of the schemes that his sister had. He could have easily stopped, because they're poisoning people slowly. He could have slopped up the tea or something, spilled it, I don't know, do something. But he didn't. And I understand what you're saying. Like, he did get off easy. He did get off easy, in that sense, obviously. But I think that was the thing, was that maybe it was like a background decision where they were like, oh, Tom Hiddleston, you've done a really good job. Your role's been really complete as Thomas Sharp. We've had you in a lot of scenes. But, now the spotlight has to turn to Jessica Chastain. She's super popular now. She's super hit now. We got to give her some scenes to show off more angles of her acting skills.
Okay. I would say that Tilson was already like the more established talent. I mean, he was Loki for a start, and I mean he carries a lot across that a lot of that Loki.
No, but I mean
charm, so.
but I mean he is the main character in the whole thing. So he was in like 75% of the scene, I would say. Whereas like Jessica Chastain really gets not a whole lot of appearances. So her character was pretty underused also. But I also get like the effect of it was that she was supposed to have that mystery behind her, where she was kind of like suspicious and dark in the background. Something is not right about her. And, I mean, those feelings definitely work out really well.
Further watching, I mean, what do you pair with this film? Exactly. What sort of stands out as being a good sort of pairing for
I went for the most straightforward film, and that was Jane Eyre. 2011's Jane Eyre, also with Mia Wasikowska, and opposite Michael Fassbender.
Okay.
Yeah, and like Jane Eyre, the 2011 one, I've never watched any other version, so I don't know if there is really nice. Like, you get a lot of, like, the feeling of watching, like, this one. But in a much more complete way, because obviously Jane Eyre is already, like, a really established story, so the execution of that one also is there, where there's, like, a little bit of, mystery, a little bit of creepiness. So yeah, no, there's a lot of, like, the feeling of it is there. And yeah, that's the only one I think of that could pair with it. Maybe I'll think of something else, but I don't know right now. Okay. What would you pair with it?
I would pair, let me see. Well, first off, the one that jumps out to me the most would be Bram Stoker's Dracula. Seeing Gary Oldman as the title of Vamp, and I think it's a very sort of underrated adaptation, and it's one that's sort of really fallen by the wayside since it's been released. I mean, when it first came out, I mean, it was just everywhere. It just got a lot of buzz, and it was sort of had that 1-2 hit because you had Bram Stoker's Dracula come out, and then shortly after you had Kenneth Branagh's adaptation of Frankenstein came out with Robert De Niro as Frankenstein's monster. But I think if you like Crimson Peak, I think there's certainly a lot of style that sort of carries across, and certainly Francis Ford Coppola shares a similar visual eye for the Gothic. And I mean, yes, it's obviously you got ghosts in this one, which I would say are pretty pointless in Crimson Peak. They never serve any purpose apart from to give Doug Jones a job.
But at the same time, I mean, obviously we're in further viewing, so I'm not going to dive too deep into it. I actually think that one scene in particular inside, like, the mansion, I thought that scene was done really well, where the ghost is kind of, like, coming out of the floor.
Yeah.
And that scene, I tell you, the first time I watched it, it was the most memorable part of Crimson Peak to me when I watched it the first time. And I still remember the feeling and, like, that kind of dread I felt when I was watching it. There's I think it has a lot to do with, like, Del Toro's just how he angles his cameras and stuff like that. Even, like, when there's, like, the ghost coming at her and she's in the bathtub or something like that, there's a lot of things like that really work.
Yeah, I mean, certainly with Coppola's Dracula, I mean, it's certainly got its issues, such as Keanu Reeves attempted to do an English accent, which doesn't work, and certainly something that doesn't before Crimson Peak, as everyone can pretty much do their accents. Although I have heard people criticize Charlie Hunnam's English accent, despite the fact he is English. So, go figure. But no, I think that would be the one that sort of stands out to myself. As I said before, I'm not a huge fan of costume drama, so I'm the wrong person to ask if you're looking for further recommendations of Gothic costume dramas. I mean, you could obviously check out the series Penny Dreadful. Again, it's sort of tapping into a similar sort of vibe, but no, I think if you check out Bram Stoker's Dracula, I think you might find much to enjoy there as well. So this brings us to the end of this episode of Movies and Tea. As always, you can find us both on Facebook and Twitter. You can also find our blog, you can also find our complete archive of episodes, which is moviesandteapodcast.wordpress.com. So wherever you happen to be listening to us, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Maybe leave us a review. It all helps raise the profile of the show and gets us out there more. But where are we going for our final episode of the season now?
Yeah, we're going, and the next one is going to be the 2017 Oscar-winning movie. I believe it was Oscar-winning. Yeah, it was like Best Picture, right? The Shape of Water.
So make sure you join us next time as we'll be discussing The Shape of Water. But thank you as always to my co-host Kim, and thank you as always to our listeners, and wishing you all a very